What is up, everybody? Crypto Noah, aka your favorite blockchain entrepreneur, back with another fire video. And in this video is actually special because this is our very first book review. Okay, so since 2015, I've been reading 1 to 2 books every week to 2 weeks, and every single book that I've read, I've taken notes on so that I can go back and read the most important parts of the book so that I don't forget. And it's very important to write down your notes versus typing them, because when you type, there's only about a couple hundred muscle movements that's happening. And we all know that our brain controls our hands. But when you write, there is hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of muscle movements. So it's encoding it into your brain a lot deeper. Okay. You know, we've all heard the saying, knowledge is power. I would go as far as saying knowledge is potential power, because it's about what you do with that knowledge. But the thing is, you can only apply what you know. Okay, so in this book review, the first one, we're going to be reviewing the Bitcoin standard. And whenever someone asks me about, what is crypto, what is Bitcoin, this is always the first book that I refer them to. The beginning of the book strictly talks about the traditional financial system and how hard money works and, gold pretty much. And it doesn't start to talk about Bitcoin until it gets toward the end of the book. So it gives you a really good grasp of how the financial system works. And then at the end, it talks about how Bitcoin can fit in. Okay. How I'm going to do these book reviews is that, like I said, I've been taking notes on all of the most important things in the book. So I'll underline what's in the book and I'll write it down. So I'm going to read you the most important things that I got from the Bitcoin standard, as well as elaborate on the points that I wrote down here in my journal. And actually, before we get started, if you want to know exactly why Bitcoin has value, what it is, how it works, I actually made a video on that. So click the description and then click the link in the video that's titled Bitcoin Deep Dive. All right, so now let's get started. Bitcoin offered a payment network with its own native currency and used a sophisticated method for members to verify all transactions without having to trust any single member of the network. So basically, Bitcoin operates on what's called a blockchain, and the Bitcoin blockchain works by random people scattered across the world having to agree on every single transaction. And remember, they all have financial incentive to agree on legit transactions. So as long as everyone agrees, or as long as at least 51% of the network agrees on a transaction, that adds the next block to the chain, and this happens every 10 minutes. And this is what they mean by it doesn't have to trust a single member, because it's relying on everyone who has a financial incentive to keep the network honest. Moving on. While investment is also meant to produce income to be exchanged for other goods, is distinct from money in 3 respects. First, it offers a return, which money does not. Second, it always involves risk of failure, whereas money is supposed to carry out the least amount of risk. Third, investments are less liquid than money, necessitating significant transaction costs every time they're to be spent. So I feel like that's pretty much self-explanatory. Next point, for something to assume a monetary role, it has to be costly to produce. Otherwise, temptation to make money on the cheap will destroy the wealth of the savers and destroy the incentive anyone has to save in this medium. So basically what that means is, imagine if it was cheap to mine gold. Gold would not be as valuable as it was today, because anyone will be able to mine it, and it will be, the price of gold is determined by supply and demand. So if the supply is constantly increasing, gold already has a 2% annual inflation rate, meaning every 50 years the supply doubles. Imagine if the inflation rate was 10% annually. Gold would not be a good long-term store of value, because the supply would be appreciating too fast. Next thing, the most important economic decisions to any individual's well-being are the ones they conduct in their trade-offs with their future self. Now that one's deep, because a lot of people don't invest because they look at it as spending money, when in all actuality, when you invest, you're saving for your future self. But a lot of people can't conceptualize that, because the act of delaying gratification is one of the hardest things to do. There's a study where they had a bunch of little kids where they gave them a cookie, and they said, if you eat this cookie now, you won't get the next cookie, but if you wait to eat this cookie, you'll get 2. The kids who chose to eat the cookie immediately, aka not delay gratification, when they followed up with them later on in life, those kids were actually less successful than the kids who delayed gratification. Moving on, this one's important. Any supply of money is sufficient for any economy of any size, and any quantity of economic transactions could be supported by any money supply of any size as long as the units are divisible enough. Purchasing power is what matters. So, just to give you guys a fun fact, of all the gold that's ever been mined in history, when boiled down to its purest form, liquid gold only fills up 3 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So all this war, all this fighting for 3 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So what they're saying is, it doesn't matter the size of the money, it doesn't matter of the supply or the quantity, as long as it's divisible enough. Meaning, if you look at the periodic table of elements, gold is the only element whereby you can burn it down and form it back together without it losing any of its properties. Bitcoin is kind of the same thing. It is also divisible. So just like 100 pennies equal $1, 100 million Satoshis equal 1 Bitcoin. Moving on, prices then are not simply a tool to allow capitalists to profit. They are the information system of economic production, communicating knowledge across the world and coordinating the complex processes of production. Prices are the only mechanism that allows trade and specialization to occur in market economies. Without resort to prices, humans could not benefit from the division of labor and specialization beyond some very primitive small scale. Pretty self-explanatory. Next one. Should the government decide to set the price of apples and prevent it from moving, the outcome will be either a shortage or a surplus and large losses to society overall from overproduction or underproduction. Next one. The most important metric in determining the state of the economy is the level of aggregate spending across society. When society collectively spends a lot, the spending incentivizes producers to create more products, thus employing more workers and reaching full-time employment equilibrium. If spending rises too much beyond the capacity of producers to keep up, it will lead to inflation and a rise in the overall price level. On the other hand, when society spends too little, producers reduce their production, firing workers and increasing unemployment, resulting in a recession. Next point here, recession for Keynes, and that's John Maynard Keynes. He was like a very early on economist, I guess you can say. Recessions for Keynes are caused by abrupt reductions in the aggregate level of spending. The solution is for the government to stimulate spending, which increases production and reduces unemployment and increases money supply, government spending, and raises taxes. The solution is for governments to stimulate spending, which increases production and reduces unemployment. And how they stimulate spending is through increasing the money supply, government spending, buying different kinds of assets like they did during the pandemic, and raising taxes. Next one here. Society with the money of stable value generally develop low time preferences. Low time preferences is an acronym in here for long-term thinking. Learning to save and think of the future while societies with high inflation and depreciating economies will develop high time preference as people lose track of the importance of saving and concentrate on immediate enjoyment. On a national level, nations using sound money are far more likely to stay peaceful or to have limited conflict with one another because sound money places real constraints on the ability of government to finance its military operations. In a society of sound money, the government is relying on the consent of its population to finance its operation. Next one here. In a society in which capital investments are financed from savings, capital is owned by those with a lower time preference, aka long-term thinking, and they allocate it based on their own estimation of the likelihoods of market success, receiving rewards for being correct and losses for being wrong. But with unsound money, savings are destroyed and capital is instead created from inflationary banking credit, and its allocation is decided by the central banks and its member banks. Instead of the allocation being decided by the most prudent members of society with the lowest time preference, aka long-term thinking, and best market foresight, it's decided by governments whose incentive is to lend as much as possible, not be correct, as they are significantly protected from the downside. Next one here. Whatever object humans choose as a store of value, its value will rise, and because more of the object can always be made, others would produce more of the object to acquire the value stored in it. Should more people demand to hold Bitcoin, the only way to meet the demand is through appreciation of the existing supply. Bitcoin is the only asset whereby once the demand increases, you can't increase the supply. So if you think about gold, let's say the price of gold does a 10x today. You're going to be seeing gold miners popping up out of everywhere because they have an incentive to mine the gold and sell it so they can make money. Well, if the price of Bitcoin does a 10x, even if people start mining more, which they will, you won't be able to increase the inflation rate. Like right now, only 3.25 Bitcoin are being mined every 10 minutes, and it's governed by what's called a difficulty adjustment. So if the price does a 10x and more people start to mine, the hash rate is going to increase and the difficulty adjustment is going to increase, making it harder to mine that Bitcoin. So how Bitcoin mining works, long story short, is through computing power, having to guess random numbers and letters. So let's say it's 32 random numbers and letters, and your computer is constantly spitting out guesses. The more computing power you have, the faster it can guess, which increases your chances of guessing it correctly. Well, when more miners come on, that number gets longer and longer. So if you have more computing power, you increase your chances of guessing the block, but it's not going to increase Bitcoin's inflation rate. And the same thing happens on the downside. Like when the price tanks and mining becomes unprofitable for certain miners, well, now that those random numbers and letters get smaller, making it easier to guess, so that way it can continue with the same inflation schedule. Moving on, in the long run, the absence of any authority that can control Bitcoin's supply will likely go from creating volatility in the price to reducing it. You know, when a brand new asset class is coming to market, there's always going to be volatility before there's stabilization, because the amount of people that are adopting it / buying it in the beginning is going to be small, and it's going to grow gradually. And eventually, once institutions step in and they have, 10, 20, 30, investment timelines, they're thinking 10, 20, 30 years ahead. They're not selling when it dips. And when they sell is when the price really, really tanks. And since they're holding, it allows the market to stabilize. Moving on, Bitcoin can be understood as a technology that converts electricity to truthful records through the expenditure of processing power. We just explained mining. I feel like that's a great way to put it. Almost done here. Bitcoin will likely increase individuals' freedom while not necessarily making it easier to commit crimes. To be honest with you, if you want to commit a crime, it's best you use cash, because every single transaction that's ever happened on Bitcoin's blockchain can be seen by anyone with an internet connection. So all those people who thought they were smart operating these human trafficking operations using Bitcoin as payments, well, the FBI caught so many of them because they were able to track the transactions back to the wallets. Fraud is immediately detected and reversed by other network members who have strong incentives to ensure the integrity of the network. So I just told you how the blockchain works by not relying on a single person. If you're mining Bitcoin and you spend all this money on getting the mining rigs, a facility, fans to keep them cool, security, so that your wallets don't get stolen, do you think you're going to want to risk doing a illicit transaction? No, because then you can't earn the block reward and make money. So now you're actually losing money. So the incentives are aligned with Bitcoin because they're directly mining Bitcoin. So if they're directly mining it, they don't want to do anything that's going to make its value go down. Okay? Next thing. The colossal processing power needed to make the Bitcoin network operate eliminates the need for trusted third parties to process payments or determine the supply of money. Next point. The security of a blockchain database is entirely reliant on the expenditure of processing power, on verification of transactions and proof of work. Next one. For this system to be secure, the verifiers who expend the processing power have to be compensated in the currency of the payment system. And I just kind of explained that one on the last point. Imagine if people were mining Bitcoin but they got paid in US dollar, well, they wouldn't care about the price of Bitcoin so much and the network being secure because they're not getting paid in it. So if they're not getting paid in it, they're not worrying about the price dropping as much. Last point. There cannot be widespread adoption of blockchain technology in industries reliant on trust and intermediaries because the mere presence of intermediaries makes all the costs associated with running a blockchain superfluous, aka extra. Any application of blockchain technology will only make commercial sense if its operation is reliant on the use of electronic cash, and only if electronic cash disintermediation provides economic benefits outweighing the use of regular currencies and payment channels. So, those are all the notes that I took from the Bitcoin Standard. I would definitely recommend reading the book. On a scale of 1 to 10, I give Bitcoin Standard a 10 out of 10, as it, like I said, covers the traditional financial system, gold, the macroeconomy, and then at the end, it talks about how Bitcoin fits in. If you like this review, give it a like. Also, I would strongly ask you to consider subscribing, as I'm trying to bootstrap this channel from zero, and I plan to continue to deliver the highest quality crypto content, book reviews, and day in the lives so that I can inspire you to be your best self. So with that, I thank you so much for tuning in. I love all of you. And if you have another book that you want me to review, put it in the comment. But until then, I'll see you in the next video.